Alright, I'm gonna listen to some Death Grips while I do my recording here. Let's do it. I'm gonna be honest with you. It feels good to unwind from all those Resident Evil games with some first-person shooters to relax with. On the hardest difficulty, of course, because this isn't quite a relaxing time unless I die so many times at certain parts of the game that I eventually reach nirvana through suffering. Still, it's what I do best, so I just don't feel right unless I'm taking an opportunity to make myself feel superior to a hypothetical worse player. This time I decided to go back and play Crysis 2 again because I remember it being a good time, but it had been quite a while and it was back before my go hard or go home policy, so I figured it would be good to give it a try. I own this game for the PlayStation 3, and while I considered buying the PC version for this review, I thought it would be fun to see how the port holds up. It holds up surprisingly well, actually. There are a couple small graphical glitches that kind of threw me for a loop. There's this glitch where if you die shortly after picking up an item, when you load back, the item isn't visibly there, but you can still pick it up. Sometimes the AI can be a bit glitchy, but I know for a fact that the first Crysis doesn't have the smartest AI even on the PC, but I have no comparison for Crysis 2 on PC for the AI there. Sometimes the enemies will run into walls or get turned around on you. This isn't often, and otherwise the enemies are designed really well, but it does happen every now and again. Beyond that, this game looks amazing. I own an original model PS3, so this is a game from 2011 running on a console from 2006, and with HDMI hooked up, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's truly a testament to the technology of the time. It runs smoothly with minimal visual glitches, and I didn't experience any frame rate issues. The amount of detail in this thing is stunning. Beautiful skyboxes, great shader effects, stunning lighting, the visual effects on the HUD when you change the suit are very kinesthetically pleasing. When buildings fall, it really looks like a building that's collapsing underneath its own weight. There are a lot of late PS3 and early PS4 games I played that didn't even look this good. Story-wise, things are actually better than I remember. I forgot a lot of the stuff that happens towards the end, and I really like how all the characters here unfold. Every character is a well-constructed arc that rounds out by the end, and the main character is about as well written as one can be for a mute. You play as Alcatraz, a dying man whose squad was wiped out by the alien squids. Just before you buy the farm, a man named Prophet from the first game finds you and puts you into his biotech suit because he's dying from the alien virus. This means the second the suit comes off, you die. There are even a couple of times where other characters scan you and they tell you in creative ways that you're a dead man. It definitely helps to stay motivated knowing that not only are you going to die if you don't move, but so will the rest of mankind. The pacing is just great here too. Not just in the plot, but in the gameplay as well. Crysis 2 does a wonderful job really getting you used to things before ramping up the difficulty later on. The beginning of the game is a little bit slow, but a little bit after the halfway point, it'll really start taking some thinking on your feet to get through some of these encounters. One of the reasons I love this game is because when stuff starts getting all fucked up, it's closer to the end, so it feels more climactic than in a lot of other games at the time. I remember back in 2012 when I played Battlefield 3 for the first time, and I hated it. I couldn't even stand to play it up into the halfway point. That whole era of modern shooters really bored the crap out of me. Modern Warfare 1 and 2 were great, and Spec Ops: The Line obviously, but most of them are just like way too much. I don't have an attention span, but that game is made for people who obviously have less of an attention span than me. That was my big concern going into Crysis 2 the first time, since they had taken that massive open level FPS route that they did with the first Crysis, and the sequel was trying to take the same concept but linear it down a bit. Fortunately, they not only pulled it off, but they made a game that in a lot of ways was better to the original Crysis, which is saying a lot in certain respects. Crysis will go down in history as the last of the true tech demos. For all the Zoomers out there who wonder why they'll occasionally see an obese 35-year-old man in an anime t-shirt twitching in the back of a local computer store muttering to himself and asking everyone who walks in the door if their rig runs Crysis, the answer is simple. Crysis on full settings looks like it would have come out in 2014 and it was released back in 2007. This really isn't an exaggeration. Crysis looks phenomenal. It looked so phenomenal that even top-of-the-line PCs struggled to run it at high settings at the time. Even modern rigs occasionally have issues running it because it turns out it's hard to optimize a game that was designed for a computer that didn't really exist. The texture detail is on par for other games at the time, but it's the extra visual effects that they added that really hold the whole thing together. All the foliage and jungle environments look remarkable even today. Swimming underwater looks realistic with really nice foliage. For the time, Crysis was unbelievable. It literally felt like looking into the future because you kinda actually were. The thing about this, however, is it was the point where graphics technology sort of plateaued. There have been advancements, obviously, but none as big at once since Crysis came out. You can prove it mathematically, too. An NVIDIA 6200, which was a graphics card manufactured in 2004, couldn't run Crysis at any playable rate, even on the lowest settings. However, games released this year can run perfectly fine on an NVIDIA 900 series, which is a 7-year-old GPU. What I'm getting here is that Crysis was the end of the end as far as traditional graphics text demos, and that alone solidifies its place in gaming history. Hello, this is Scr00bl0rd here. I was just editing that last part, and it sounded really fucking stupid, so I just wanted to sort of make my point a little more clear so I sounded less fucking stupid. Crysis 1 was big and revolutionary for the time, and it was difficult to run it on GPUs and stuff. Not difficult, but I mean, you really needed top-of-the-line GPUs even coming out the next couple of years, and a lot of the industry and the visual department had to play catch-up in order to cram as much shit as they could into their engine like CryEngine could, and it really was like a big benchmark for several years. So, once the industry had caught up, everything really did kind of start to plateau, and then we hit this point where, like, once the 900 cards came out, I mean, you're not going to be able to run everything with all the stuff, but I mean, you can build a budget gaming PC for a cheaper cost than you could have in the equivalent of the time in 2017, and that was sort of my big point, and Crysis was the first big thing to utilize that out-and-coming bigger graphic card technology. All right, back to video. Also, I said 2017, I meant 2007. Fuck, I'm off of it today. Crysis 2, however, has been put in the position of living up to that while also making things feel new, and I do think they did a great job. Crysis 2 streamlines the mechanics of the previous game by making each suit mode available by button press rather than having to open up and select from a wheel menu. This makes things much less clunky when you're in the thick of things and need to change on a dime. While there are improvements like this that make the overall experience a little more polished, this comes at the sacrifice of difficulty. Crysis on the highest settings of difficulty was never the hardest game to begin with, but there are large chunks of this game that are easy to get through just by cloaking and watching AI patterns so you can avoid their movements. This game gives you multiple options for approaching combat, which they refer to as tactical options, but unless you want this to turn into a constant cover-based shooter, you'll be using the cloak to approach things with a more hit-and-run tactics, as the game calls it. I recommend playing this game a couple times and trying out different strategies. You can always change your playstyle level to level without difficulty if you want to, but it can be really easy to fall into certain habits. This doesn't mean the game is bad though, it just means that playing on anything lower than the highest difficulty kind of turns into a wash. I went in expecting a lot more turbulence than I got. I wasn't disappointed by the game as far as the gameplay and story goes, but I was a little bit let down because I was expecting more of a challenge. If you get caught and shot, then you'll often go down quickly, but the amount of times you actually get caught when you're playing stealth is minimal, and so you'll just end up reloading and doing it right the second time. So death is really more of an inconvenience than anything. It would also be nice if it wasn't just a checkpoint-based save system, but that's a complaint that I'd have to level against every first-person shooter on the consoles of the time, and frankly, I do. I do. While Crysis 2 isn't mediocre, I seem to be having a hard time finding things to write about. I want to feel like this is more my failing than the game's, because the game is great, but it doesn't light my world on fire. If I had to pinpoint a reason, I'd say it's because the options presented to play the game in multiple ways somehow waters down the whole experience. The fact the suit has low power makes any kind of open combat almost impossible without walls to hide behind, and it's a lot easier to just find a hiding spot. Also, once you start finding this weapon called the K-Volt, any challenge the game was presenting you with is gone. The K-Volt is a lightning weapon that drops enemies both alien and human alike in just a couple of shots. It's highly effective against the bigger boss enemies like the pingers, and effectively makes any other weapon in the game useless. You won't start getting this until about like a little past the halfway point, but that's when the game really starts to get hard, so it all cancels out. The way this game is designed is there are ammo caches everywhere, so you hardly ever run out of ammo for any weapon that you have equipped. To the game's credit, the weapons here are fun and modifiable. I really enjoy having things like a silent shotgun that I can use to clear out an area of guys without anyone noticing. Also, on top of being able to modify weapons to a certain degree, you can also add enhancements to your suit by collecting nanotech that aliens drop when they die. To be honest, I really never used either of them, and things turned out just fine. I saved up until the second to last level to collect a power-up that boosts my stealth, and that was it. This changed nothing, and if I had completely ignored it, I would have gotten through the game just fine either way. That's what I'm getting at about this game that's not really lighting my world on fire, I think. It has a lot of cool stuff and things to play with, but I don't really notice them because the gameplay is designed in a way that makes it almost worthless. It is a little disappointing because the presentation and the story are really well done, but the execution just isn't there enough to quite give it that boost into really, truly great. If you're curious about the Crysis series, I definitely recommend these first two games, but maybe spread it out a bit to avoid exhaustion.
Later, Nick!